Thanks, Mark, and good morning, everyone. It is great to be here. As we said, my name is Jason Rae. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I serve as the president and CEO for the Chamber. I've got a deck that I'm going to walk us through this morning. Happy to share it afterwards with folks so that you don't have to scribble down everything that's in it, but try to put as much as I could together kind of as a building off of the session we did last fall, really as kind of a business 201 about next steps to really build that LGBT inclusion at work. So I thought I would start with just a quick overview of the Wisconsin LGBT Chamber. We were founded in 2012. We just celebrated 9 years as an organization. And we are a statewide group of about 700 LGBTQ and allied-owned businesses from across Wisconsin. We're hosting more than 100 events a year, including our Business Equality Summit. We just had our virtual career fair 2 weeks ago, Women's Leadership Luncheon, and many more. We've got an online business directory that's getting about 10,000 searches a month from folks across the state trying to find businesses that are inclusive, as well as our online job board, all around this idea of how do we work to build a stronger pro-fairness community in Wisconsin, especially in a global marketplace like today. How can we create that community where people want to live, work, play, and own businesses, hopefully. So today I thought I would start with a couple assumptions of the LGBTQ community really briefly, kind of as a 101, just to get us all on the same page with the building block. Then talk about some informal actions that folks can take, and then really some formal actions that your business and organization can take, and leave room for questions and answers. So start with getting us all on the same page with language. I like to define just a couple pieces at the beginning of any diversity presentation I do. And first is sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. And sexual orientation is the inherent or immutable emotional, romantic, or sexual attraction to other people. Gender identity, on the other hand, is one's innermost sense of sex, whether they consider themselves male, female, perhaps neither. And then expression is how they express that. And the reason these are important to know the difference between the three is state law and federal law does spell out sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. It varies state to state. It varies what's protected. So those are three kind of different pieces. And my favorite image, and I've shared this before, my 101 is the genderbread person, really explaining. You see the gender identity is the brain, how you feel about yourself. The sexual orientation is at heart. And then the expression, the outline, how you present yourself to the world. 4 other quick terms as we get on the same page. One is LGBTQ. It is an acronym for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer. Sometimes you might see it as LGBT, sometimes LGBTQ+, sometimes LGBT+. It really depends on the individual and their comfort level, and there isn't one right or wrong way with it. I've seen particularly younger generations using the term queer, which is usually an umbrella term to describe something catch-all for people who don't identify exclusively as straight. It used to be a much more derogatory term, and it is, especially among college students, they choose to identify as queer and not gay or lesbian. So whatever you're comfortable with, as far as LGBT, LGBTQ, all good. And then I use cisgender, which is a person whose gender identity aligns with the sex that might be typically assigned at birth, or transgender, which is an umbrella term for people whose sexual gender identity and expression is different from that the sex that they were assigned at birth. So just a couple quick terms, just so as I use them throughout the presentation today, folks are aware on that. So I start with assumptions. First, assumption number 1, that the LGBT community is all gay, white men, double income, no kids. And that's not the case by any means, but it is an assumption we get often, actually. We were invited as the chamber to a group of other diverse organizations, and they originally said, well, you can't be there. You're just all white men who have a lot of money, and you're not really diverse. And it's that idea of it is a community that is intersecting other communities, and you can't always see the differences. And I use this iceberg model, just as one point in this of, there are only some traits you can see, but there's so much more diversity there that may be beneath that waterline that folks don't see. And I pulled some stats from the Williams Institute at UCLA. They are the premier LGBT research firm. And this is about characteristics of LGBT people in the US. And they were estimating about a year ago, about 13 million individuals in the US identified as LGBT. Now, what's interesting is you look at this, you see the breakdown here. 42% identify as male, 58% is female, just over a quarter raising children, and you can see the age disbursement, you can see the racial breakdown, that it is a community that does intersect with other communities. And that's an important thing to think about when it comes to the workplace in particular, that people may bring different identities to the table, they may lead with different identities, but that it isn't one monolithic community that you can just say, here's what we need to do. In Wisconsin, this comes from the Movement Advancement Project. They were estimating that about 3.8% of adults in Wisconsin are LGBTQ, and that makes up for about 4% of the workforce here in the state. Now, when you look at, it kind of breaks down here again, this is the Wisconsin version from the Williams Institute, and it does show that similar male, female breakdown, similar raising kids, not raising kids, and you can see the breakdown by race, ethnicity, and age distribution. One of the interesting pieces for both kind of Wisconsin and nationally when it came to this, and this is when we talk about the income piece, they estimate that about 25% have income less than $24,000 for a family. So it is a diverse community that comes with multiple identities, multiple experiences that way. Now, along with multiple experiences and things, there are some general things that we have found to be true. We partner every year with a group called Community Marketing and Insights, and they do a community survey of the community. And they were asked, this was from the 2020 data, 2021 is coming out later this month, but individuals were asked, do they agree with the following statements? And their top 5 responses were that corporations that support LGBT equality are more important than ever. About 86% said companies that support LGBT equality will get more of my business this year. That pride events are important to a community, that they tend to purchase from companies that market to and support the community, and that they fear there will be a rollback of equality gains in the coming year. When we think of the purchasing piece here and supporting companies, there have been studies that have shown that LGBTQ individuals would be willing to spend up to twice as much on a product or service if they knew the company that they were supporting was supportive of the community. And that can be done in a multitude of ways, and I'll share some during this presentation of ways to kind of reach out and show that support. So that was assumption 1. Assumption 2 is that this is 2021. Coming out is easy now, and most people are out at work. What percentage of folks do you think are actually out at work? 20%? Others? 10%? So 46% are closeted at work. 46% are closeted. So if you do the math there, and I'm 54% are out at work. So just over half of LGBTQ people are out at work. 1 in 5 LGBTQ workers report having been told or had coworkers imply that they should dress in a more feminine or masculine manner. 53% report hearing jokes about lesbian or gay people at least once in a while. 31% of LGBTQ workers said they felt unhappy or depressed at work. And the top reason they didn't report any of these negative things, they didn't think anything would be done about it. They didn't think anything would actually be done about it in the workplace. I skipped over a slide here quickly as getting to this one, but it's a thought exercise, and it's a true experience I had. I was working with one business up in Northeast Wisconsin and was on site with one of their employees, and it was a larger corporation. And he came to me and he said, I'm not out. I've been employed here for 22 years. Every Monday morning I go and people say, well, what'd you do for the weekend? Like, I can never talk about my partner. I have to watch every pronoun I use. I can't say anything about it because I'm worried about what they'll say at work. I'm worried about my opportunity to advance. I'm worried that I'll hurt my relationships with coworkers. And hearing that story always makes me pause and say, that's why the work that we have to do here in the workplace is so important. And it leads into a further report from the Human Rights Campaign on just the overall business impact of inclusion. And they call this the cost of the closet and the rewards of inclusion. And it shows that employee engagement can suffer up to 30% due to unwelcoming environments at the workplace. I know it's a little hard to see perhaps, but it talks here about 27% of folks avoiding certain people at work, 35% lying about their personal life, 30% feeling distracted or avoiding certain tasks and projects at work. And when we think about this, it has not only a negative impact on that person's well-being, of how they feel about themselves, about how comfortable they feel in the workplace, but that also has a corollary effect to the business's performance and how business is operating. If you have an employee that is feeling distracted at work or avoiding doing certain tasks, if they don't feel comfortable and safe, they're not going to bring their best self to work every day. And that's going to hurt the company's overall bottom line as well. You'll likely then, they'll probably leave at some point. You'll have to go through the hiring process all over again, and the cost of doing that just adds up. Now, when we talk about coming out at work, there are 7 quick myths about coming out that I like to quickly go through because everyone there's some ideas. And first is that coming out is not a big deal. After all, it's the 21st century, and it still is a big deal for folks because it is revealing a part of themselves. The second is that coming out is similar for all LGBTQ people, and that's not the case. Each person has a different, unique story. Each person's, the response from family, friends, coworkers is different. So it isn't one that you can say, this is what it's going to be for everybody. Now, one of the myths is that you have complete control over whether you do or you don't come out at work. And that's not true, especially if you're trans. If you're trans and you need to alert HR because you need to start the transition process, if you need to get certain benefits, if you need to update policies, update beneficiaries, you have to come out. And you may not want to come out publicly, but you still have to come out. And it's not something that you get full control over. It's coming out has nothing to do with work, when in fact it does. Coming out at work just happens once. People come out every single day. Every time they use a pronoun, every time they do it, I think of it, it's on my resume running the LGBT Chamber. I'm coming out every time I share some of my resume, every time someone sees my LinkedIn, reads a bio. Another one is that there's only one way to come out or not to come out. And there are many ways for this to happen. And one of the big myths as well is that people are scared to come out just because of career risks. And it's not because of career risks. They're actually more worried about the risks of the relationships with their coworkers. They're worried about what people will think about them and how that will impact the friendships that they have built. This, when we think about the workplace, and this came from the McKinsey report last in 2019, that really kind of showed some microaggressions at work. And it was very clear that LGBTQ women, particularly LGBTQ or bisexual women, experience the most microaggressions at work. Now you take this and you add in other layers of identity. You add in being African American. You add in being Latinx. You add in being a person with a disability. And these continue to add up, and they continue to grow exponentially. So it's one of these reasons to think about, how do we build that workplace where people don't feel these microaggressions? How do we do the simple informal actions? And then how do we institute those into formal company policy? So another assumption is that the world is exactly as you see it. So if you were to walk up and speak with this individual and leave and share your conversation in the third person, what pronouns would you use to describe this person? She, her, I, her? I would say it's a trick question. You don't know. You can't assume someone's pronouns just because of their appearance. You don't want to do that. That's one of the biggest microaggressions actually at work is using pronouns. And pronouns are really important. You can't always know, again, by looking at someone. If you don't know someone's pronouns, it's okay to ask. Just say, hey, what pronouns do you use? Or what pronouns do you go by? What you don't want to do is end up misgendering someone. And that's when you are incorrectly referring to a person's gender by assuming their gender identity. Perhaps maybe it's by their appearance. Misgendering can be done intentionally or more often unintentionally, but it has long-lasting harmful impacts. Using a person's correct pronouns is really a sign of respect for someone. Now, I will tell you, I don't get it perfect all the time and I mess up. If you make a mistake, apologize and move on for it. Say, oh, I'm sorry, I meant they. It's really important to make sure that you are doing the best that you can. Again, you don't have to be perfect with it, but it's about doing the best that one can with pronouns. And this chart here is just an example of 5 common pronouns. The 3 most common you'll hear are she, he, and they. I have 3 members of my team that identify with the they pronoun, and they is, it's hard for some folks because they want to say, well, they means plural, but that's how they identify, and that's what you go by. It's not, there's oftentimes I will hear people say, well, what are your preferred pronouns? And I don't like the term preferred in it because it's not somebody's preferred pronouns. It is somebody's pronouns that they go by. Much like if somebody can say, well, what's your preferred name? Well, you have a name. It's not just your preferred one. You have your name that you go by. So I'm going to start with some informal actions that everyone can take as you are in the workplace, as an individual in the community, and the work that you're doing. And I take this from my friend Jennifer Brown's book, How to Be an Inclusive Leader. And I start with this, and I actually challenge folks. I don't like the term ally. When folks say I want to be an ally, I think of ally as passive, as sitting there just letting things happen. I want people to be advocates for inclusion. And it really starts with phase 1, where you might be unaware of what's going on around you. Phase 2 is that initial awareness where you know basic concepts of inclusion, where you're thinking about it a little bit. Phase 3 is where you're active. If somebody asks you to do something, you'll step up and say, sure, I'm happy to do that. But then phase 4 is the important one. It's the advocate. How do you go about and yourself lead that change, lead that work, lead that effort to build that inclusive community? How are you in the workplace making sure that you are advocating for policies, that you are taking positive stances? And there's a couple ways to do that. These come from a book called Belonging at Work by my friend Rhodes Perry out in Oregon. And Rhodes lays out 4 ways for individuals to be an advocate. The first is committing to continuous self-education, which you are all doing here right now by being here and learning. It's applying an inclusion lens to your everyday work. In this, one of the ways I like to define it is many people know the golden rule: treat others as you want to be treated. And when we apply an inclusion lens, I actually consider it the platinum rule. It's treating others as they want to be treated, treating others as they want to be treated. It's about communicating the diversity, equity, and inclusion business case and making sure you're telling people why it matters to be inclusive, what happens when you do. It's about getting involved with workplace DE&I efforts. And then it's about taking a leadership role. And I've had questions when I mention the leadership role on this, and folks say, well, I'm not out, I'm not a part of the community, I should step back. I'm just, an ally who wants to show support. And I'm working with one individual who said that, and I asked some LGBT folks, and they said, no, we want you to stand up. We want you to lead. Sometimes you can be our biggest champions in the room because you're fighting for us, that we don't always have to be the ones leading the charge. I was working with one company where they had an LGBT employee resource group, and it was headed by an ally. And that ally didn't think they should do it, but no one in the company felt like they could be safe and be out. So they wanted to wait until that company culture was created. So it's all about how can you step up and help lead and advocate for that change. The other thing you can do on a personal level is just to continue to support LGBTQ and allied businesses. I encourage you to visit the Chamber. We've got our online business directory. Next time you're traveling the state and looking for perhaps a hotel to stay at or a restaurant to visit or other services, to take a look and just, as an individual, just continue to support diverse-owned businesses. But there are more formal things you can do in the workplace that I want to focus the latter half of the presentation on. And kind of going through a few different formal actions that you as a company, whether you are large or small, can take. Now, some of them may feel bigger tasks. Some may be things, I can go do this today. The first is updating company policies. And it's really important that you ensure that both sexual orientation and gender identity and expression are in the list of protected classes in your company's non-discrimination and anti-harassment policies. I also encourage, if you do trainings on diversity, equity, and inclusion, or anti-harassment trainings in the workplace, to include realistic, real-world LGBTQ examples in that. And then the other part when we think of updating company policies is looking at your benefit programs for inclusion. Is your company's healthcare coverage inclusive? Is your leaves of absence inclusive? And that's including, not just marriage, but we see domestic partner on here. People in Wisconsin still can register as domestic partners. There are many who may choose not to get married for a myriad of reasons, but can still legally register as domestic partners. I've seen several companies who thought that once marriage equality came down in 2015, they could, clean up their benefits and get rid of that domestic partner, healthcare coverage or leaves of absence for that. But we are encouraging folks to continue leaving that in because there's reasons folks may not choose to get married, but are in committed relationships where they register with the state as domestic partners. So ensuring that it is clear, clean, and inclusive based on sexual orientation and gender identity and expression in all policies and benefits. It also includes updating dress code policies. And for those that do have dress codes, one, we often consider eliminating them altogether, but really focusing and saying first that transgender and gender non-conforming employees have the right to dress in a way that matches their gender identity. And the reason we say about eliminating the dress code policies altogether is it's a very binary choice. It's male or female, usually in those dress codes, and it's saying men must wear this, women must wear this. I remember working at a retail store during part of high school and college, and at a certain part of the year, women were required to wear hosiery and skirts of a certain length and certain high heels and things like that. Men had to be in a tie. But if you are gender non-binary, how do you fit into that? How do you fit into which policy you should be? Where do you belong in that spectrum? So allowing people to dress in a professional manner, but in a way that allows them to express themselves is really important. It's one we're seeing more and more companies engage in right now. The other part is then sharing your pronouns in the workplace. And some of this is informal actions that you can do. Others are more formal that you can put in with your company. So I would start every meeting, and I do with, good morning, I'm Jason, my pronouns are he, him. It's a practice that you as a company and an organization can get into by sharing those pronouns at the beginning of a meeting so that folks know, how to address you. I encourage, especially for companies, to include them in your email signatures or on business cards. And here's a couple examples of ways I've seen it. Some do it at the bottom, some might do it, right after their name. But it's a really important step. And this isn't just about LGBTQ communities. I've got a friend named Darcy, and Darcy gets about half the emails to a Ms. Smith and half to a Mr. Smith, because people assume that Darcy Smith, one way or another, by just their name, is there. So by including someone's pronouns, you can make sure that all people are being respected, being called the right pronoun. And we're encouraging companies, to think about this in your brand standards. How does it fit? I know there are a number of companies that we've worked with who have, just done the ask forgiveness, not permission model and just started adding it in to some of their signatures. And we're seeing more and more companies make it mandatory now for folks to actually go in and put pronouns in. When we do, I've seen a couple of companies recently as well as a best practice, include a link afterwards. It might say why this matters and link to mypronouns.org, which is a great informational site on pronouns, as an educational tool that folks may use so that as someone sees that in an email signature, that they may think through, oh, why does this matter? What is this about? And I'll use an example of a company, Kohl's, actually just announced about 2 or 3 weeks ago that they're now adding pronouns on all of their name tags for their associates in the stores as well. So that employees will have an opportunity when they're in store to have their name, their pronouns included on it so that folks know how to address them, that they can present themselves. So this is something small that whether you are a small company that might have a name tag for customers or whether you are a large corporation, including things like that on name badges, on IDs, is a great way to really show inclusion. And I will tell you, it is, when we talk about reaching out and engaging the community, it is a very small thing you may think, but when people see it, they notice it. When members of the LGBTQ community see someone's pronouns included on their name tag, their eyes light up and say, oh, they're walking the walk here. They're actually implementing these policies. They're actually doing this work. When we think about name tags then as well, it's really important to focus then on how are we using gender inclusive language and really shifting from assumptions that might particularly harm. So I encourage folks, this is again, small things you can do, but you can incorporate into your company, things like stopping saying with, hey guys, or good morning ladies, or and just simply good morning, or watching your sirs and ma'ams, your ladies and your gentlemen, because you're making assumptions based on a binary idea. You have men in the room where you've got people who identify as women without actually knowing that. So we encourage companies as they start thinking through, how do they, particularly let's say front of house customers, how do they engage folks? So they might walk up to a desk at a bank. Is it good morning, ma'am? Is it good morning, sir? Is it just a simple good morning? How are you today? And really watching how they're thinking through this. And this is why diversity, equity, and inclusion, while it's important to start at the top, really has to work its way down to front of house staff who are engaging customers and are often the front line for your business and organization. And when we think of then gender inclusive language, it has to go beyond just what you're saying and how you're addressing folks, but really looking at company policy, documents, procedures, and removing that gender specific language, or including options beyond male or female. The most common one we're seeing right now from companies are going through all of their HR policies and removing the he or she, usually it says, and replacing with they, them, or employee, employers. Alliant Energy is doing this right now, that they are going through all of their HR policies and taking any reference where it will say, he or she may have vacation days of this many, and replacing it with the word they may have vacation, or an employee may have, and removing any type of gender that comes with that. That includes phrases as well, like parent or guardian, instead of saying father and mother, and assuming there's a father and mother. Using spouse instead of listing husband or wife. Saying child instead of son, daughter. And really working through phrases like that that may have folks think about a gender binary piece. The other example that Alliant Energy is doing with gender neutral language is they are also examining all of their job descriptions and job titles and seeing, are those gender neutral? Does it have something where man is in the title? Or does it have in any job descriptions, he or she may do this? So really focusing on how are they presenting themselves to the community at large, and really focusing on being as gender inclusive in the language that they use in their policies. And again, when we think of some of the policies, it's things like the dress code leave we talked about, family leave, about making sure again, it's not husband or wife, but just using the gender neutral terms that could apply to everyone. And then when you're thinking in the workplace about it, one of the other things you really want to do is provide an opportunity for self-identification. And this is an opportunity for employees to self-identify their sexual orientation and gender identity on internal forms, HR files, company surveys. And this matters for kind of three reasons. One, signals commitment from that company, that you are wanting to know about who your employees actually are, that you're trying to track and enhance how you're engaging with the LGBTQ employees at your company, and that you're providing opportunities to grow. Now, what you don't want to do though is ever make self-disclosure a requirement. You don't ever want to make it a requirement that someone has to self-disclose. We are seeing a number of companies, we're working, probably I get a request every other week from a company, both big and small, saying, okay, what exact language, what exact questions should I add on my form? So I'm doing a new employee intake form. What questions do I ask? Is it just male, female as the box I check, or do we add anything else? So we encourage folks to say male, female, non-binary, or a self-describe on it, if people choose to self-describe. We ask about, do you identify as transgender as a different question? Because someone may be trans, but may not be gay. Someone may be trans and may be straight, but just their gender identity did not align with the sex that was assigned to them at birth. And then asking sexual orientation. This has been a really powerful tool we have seen for companies when folks go in, and particularly in some of their HR software systems, and really making sure that they are feeling as though they can be included and represented, but more important, counted at work. Because if you're not counted, you don't know. If you don't know what your makeup of your employees is, you don't ever know how effectively you're serving them. But again, you don't ever want to make it mandatory for folks to do this, but that's why it's a voluntary self-identification.
The standard for which it should be used, I know that it's kind of changed in a little bit in the last couple years. We do a lot of surveying with schools and other places. Is this what we should be using?
This is the most common phrasing that we've seen right now from national industry groups coming out with it, and that we've seen workplaces doing. Particularly, these are some of the phrasing and some of the questions that have come from want to say what's the software that I was talking to one company about, Workforce, Workday, one of the companies that these are how they framed all the questions in there after they kind of consulted and did the research. When we think of self-ID as well, then also think about it not just for employees, but think about it for your customers too. So think about the forms that you may hand your customers. And I was talking to someone, in the wedding industry who had a form for customers to fill out when they walked in, and using gender neutral terms, it might say wife, husband. Instead, why not spouse one, spouse two? Why are we assuming there's a gender with that? Why are we making an assumption based on what has historically been the case? But how are we making sure that we are doing more than that? As we go forward from there, there are other policies and things to look at. One is really supporting trans and gender non-conforming employees. And I think one of the most important things that companies can do is have a comprehensive policy and plan in place for employees that may transition. I actually worked with a larger manufacturing company who approached the chamber about 5 years ago. They had not had an employee want to come and transition, but they said, we want to be prepared when they do. We want to think through everything that goes on. Who do we have to notify? How do we, what's the checklist of things that we have to do? Including updating their email address. If they're saying on a Friday, hey, on Monday, I'm going to come in and I'm going to present now as Sarah, how do you update their ID? How do you update the email address? How do you make sure that the right folks in HR are notified? So having that comprehensive policy and plan in place is really important. Along with that, and you can find examples of that online. I just did some Googling last night, and there are a number of great just policies and starting points to work through with that. But one of the things you want to do when you do have those policies, and this is what I actually heard from a company the other day, make sure that there are mechanisms in place to recognize this on all administrative records. And I bolded that. And it was a smaller accounting firm, but the individual, they couldn't get the name changed in it was in 3 different departments. One was in HR, one was in IT because it was tech for the email address, one was somewhere else. So how are you figuring out that checklist and saying, how if someone wants to change their name, change their gender identity marker in a self-ID, how do you get all that done and make sure that there aren't additional burdens and hurdles that folks may need to go through? It's also wanting to provide, gender-neutral restrooms or single-stall restrooms to ensure gender non-conforming individuals have access to facilities. I often encourage folks, as they're building out spaces or as they're working at, if you have a single-stall restroom at your business or 2 single-stall restrooms where you lock the door behind you, why do they need to be gendered, one male, one female? Why can't you have 2 just single gender, all-inclusive restrooms for individuals to use the one of their choice? But allowing your employees to access, if they are gender segregated, allowing them to access ones that conform with their gender identity is really important. And then also finally, as you think about the trans and gender non-conforming employees, making sure that your healthcare coverage is inclusive of trans employees, that it does make sure that if an employee does transition, that it provides the hormone therapy that they might need to successfully go through that process. I mentioned this earlier, but it's about training staff and really showcasing that leadership, particularly front of house staff is key. We often find diversity, equity, and inclusion presentations really focus on high-level executive leaders who are great and set the tone for the company. But if it doesn't filter down from executives to management to the front of house, you could be missing out on those opportunities to really be engaged, especially for both businesses big and small. That first interaction with the customer, the way someone responds and interacts can have a lasting impact. Now, it's important to also do have those executives showcase leadership. Whether you're a CEO of a small company or a major international company, standing up and saying, during Pride Month, Happy Pride, showcasing that leadership goes a long way for employees who may not feel comfortable yet, who may not know where the company is, but it showcases that, hey, this matters, this is important. There was one company whose CEO made sure in Pride Month that he put a pride flag on his desk, and that went a long way with the customers that were seeing it. Now, and also remember though, it can't be one and done. Anything with diversity, equity, and inclusion, not just LGBTQ inclusion, but any diversity, equity, inclusion training, it needs to continue to be ongoing. Terms continue to evolve, practices continue to evolve. So it's one that knowing that it isn't just done today, but is an ongoing, continuing journey. So we talked a little bit about policies and things, but how do you actually recruit LGBTQ employees? Here I've got, one way to do so is participating in LGBTQ career fairs. We just had one 2 weeks ago at the Chamber virtually, but there are others that take place across the country, including things like ROMBA, which is reaching out MBA students for business side. Lavender Law has one. Many of these same companies, much like we do, has a job board on their website that folks can access to post inclusive positions. One other way we suggested is participating and engaging with student LGBTQ groups on local campuses. Almost every campus, whether a 2-year or a 4-year institution in the state, has some sort of LGBTQ group being present, volunteering to come as a speaker. If you're a business owner, we actually heard from one at UW-Madison who said, hey, we're a student group on business. Do you have any business owners that come in and talk to us? Reach out, go share an entrepreneurial story, go and engage with students on campus and show your support. And then I mentioned this earlier, but it's also updating job titles and descriptions to remove gendered terms, making sure that it doesn't say he or she shall do this, but the employee shall be responsible for X, Y, or Z. And it'll go a long way with employees as they look to go, especially we find, in such a global economy, folks have an opportunity to go wherever they want. And how do you position your company and your organization at the forefront to make sure that you are there, that you are inclusive, and that you're making that intentionality with it. So it's recruiting employees, and then it's what do you do once you get them in the door? And I often say one of the things you want to do is start and support an LGBT business resource group. And if you're a larger company, you may already have one, or you may be thinking of it. Business resource groups commonly used to be affinity groups or employee resource groups are a way for your company to show support and engagement for employees. This is, we call it the 4C model. It's a way that I like to have BRGs focused. One is on career. The first C is on career. So how are you as a company focused on the career and professional development of your employees? How is this business resource group helping your employees grow in their professional skills? On the community piece, how's your business resource group engaging in the community at large? How are they volunteering for groups like Building a Safer Evansville? How are they participating and being seen in the community? In culture, how are business resource groups shaping company culture, shaping company policies? And then finally, the commerce side, how are they actually driving business for your company? And by doing this, it's a great way to make sure that you are helping start and really grow company engagement, really show employees that you are invested in their personal success and that you really are focused on being as inclusive as possible. The other thing companies can do is really utilize LGBT suppliers in your supply chain. And this, this is just kind of a tiered system, but we have, much like you might have minority-owned or women-owned or veteran-owned businesses, how are you utilizing LGBT suppliers, LGBT business enterprises in your supply chain? And you may not be that big corporation that's gonna give out a bunch of contracts, but you might be a smaller business and thinking through, are we being intentional? Are we using a woman-owned business here? Are we using an LGBT-owned business if you need products or services? And really helping to make sure that you're using your dollars with companies that you can really help support and grow and uplift. So the last part here, really briefly, is about kind of showcasing your commitment publicly to LGBT inclusion. And I start with some marketing and advertising tips. First, you want to be inclusive and diverse. You don't want to assume, making it all gay white men in the photos. You want to make sure that you are inclusive and diverse with your imagery, with your language, that you're showing families, that you're showing LGBTQ people with disabilities, that you're showing a variety of areas and not just stereotyping. And this is also wanting to make sure that you're not, again, stereotyping LGBTQ individuals, doing research on terms and using them appropriately. So making sure that if you're using LGBTQ, it fits in with that language. Most importantly, I actually think, is being consistent and confident in it. More often than not, we will hear companies who start doing a marketing campaign that might have an LGBT individual in it. And it doesn't need to be the full ad. There might be an ad of a straight couple, there might be an ad of an LGBT couple, there might be somebody else by themselves in it, but they'll hear feedback from customers. Oh, look at that ad. I can't believe you'd feature something like that. And the company would get scared. They would hear negative comments and they would think, oh, we need to pull this down. This can't be included here. And being consistent and confident, saying, no, we believe in inclusion. We want to make sure that our marketing reaches all individuals that we want to serve and that all people can feel reflected in the imagery that represents what we are offering. And with that, that's where it comes in advertising in mainstream media. Folks often think that they have to only use LGBTQ individuals in ads in LGBTQ magazines or LGBTQ websites or for Pride, but including LGBT individuals in your regular just marketing efforts and outreach campaign so that individuals can be seen and can see themselves there. And then it's showing just real support. I included one image. This is just one ad that Thrivent Financial did that they put in a regular mainstream newspaper or a magazine, excuse me, that had some of their financial advisors beneath it, but just showing, one little image there can cause people to stop and say, oh, this is a company, here's what used to be Thrivent Financial for Lutherans. Here's a company that is saying, no, we support inclusion without having to say, there's nowhere on this, does it say LGBT? Does it say LGBTQ, gay, lesbian, nothing like that. It's that one image that they use that is that signal for folks. Now, there's another way as well that is new that you can also show support in addition to advertising. This is through Google. So whether you're a big or small business, Google now allows you in your business profile, if you go to pride.google, there's no .com or anything, just pride.google, you can add tags and attributes to a company's profile, whether you are LGBTQ friendly, whether you are a transgender safe space, or whether you are a gender neutral restroom. So when it may come up on a search and a business is there, it will show LGBTQ friendly on that business. So something you can go and do today. Again, whether you're a large corporation or a small company here, you can go and put those in so that folks can find you as they're searching as well. One of the other things I think folks can do as well when reaching out is not just always about marketing and trying to get customers in. It's about how are you advocating for inclusion. So one example right now in Congress is the Equality Act, and this is a bill that would specifically add the term sexual orientation and gender identity and expression to the U.S. Civil Rights Act and make it permanently enshrined in federal law. There's business coalitions that are out there supporting this, businesses that are signing on to this. It may not be something federal. It may be something local that happens. It may be a bill state legislature. It may be there may be a local effort in a community to pass a conversion therapy ban. But is your company standing up and saying, we support this legislation, or if it's anti-LGBT, are you fighting against it? It's about showing that commitment year round and not just showing up at Pride Month and doing a Pride ad, but it's how are you standing up and not just wanting the community to come to you, but showing that you're fighting for the community. A few other quick things one can do, again, is you can sponsor LGBT organizations, Pride events. We invite you to consider joining the Chamber as one of your members. And it all ties in with a question from our community market insight survey, which asked if people had made a conscious decision to make a purchase over the past 12 months due to a company's LGBT inclusive outreach, employment practices, or LGBTQ supportive political stances. And you see that 83% of folks made a conscious decision to make a purchase. So as you are looking to engage in customers, as you're working to grow your workforce, taking opportunities to update your policies, making sure that you are standing up and speaking out and that you're engaging with folks and inclusive outreach opportunities will go a long way to helping set up your company for success. Yeah.
For that one, was that just among LGBTQ individuals or was that across the board?
That was across the board, actually. And I close with, it's an ongoing journey. I share a bunch of tips today. There will probably be 10 new ones that come out next month of other ways that folks can be inclusive, but knowing that it is a continual journey that we are all on together as we work to build inclusion. So that is my contact information. Happy to talk individually with folks if there's additional questions, but also happy to make some time for Q&A right now.
When you were talking about outreach and trying to find different ways and making sure that you have inclusive information for your job or seeking jobs and things, obviously hiring is a huge issue right now. Are you noticing any trends in people that or companies that are LGBT inclusive being able to recruit or retain or anything like that
Yeah, one of the things that I'm seeing is a trend, I'm seeing more and more companies as they're trying to hire, having diversity, equity, inclusion pages on their website and actually spelling out some of the ways that their company is being inclusive. And it is not just with the LGBT community, but it's all types of diversity. About where do we take a stand? What have we done? And putting first forward what they value. And that is where I'm seeing, because as folks are looking for companies, they'll go and say, what can I find about this company? If I'm reading the about section, and say like, oh, this is a company that is not only walking the walk, but they're talking the talk and they're saying it.
I think the companies that are interested, I think we talked about this a little bit when you were in our first last fall, but for companies that are interested in becoming more involved or becoming advocates or whatever terms they're using, but then so they don't want to do something wrong, they don't want to say something wrong, they don't want to offend. What are the best options for them to be able to feel comfortable and feel confident in being able to direct those messages?
I would say first and foremost on that, it would be starting with small steps, just putting the rainbow decal on your window and just starting small and having somebody recognize that. But I would say with it, don't think you have to be perfect with it, would be the big piece. Don't think that you have to be perfect. It is still evolving, it is changing, whether you use the right term. I think it is the intentionality that will go a long way, that folks just want to, the LGBT community in particular, wants to know that it's an effort being made and that it's a journey. If something goes wrong, they might call out and you're going to work together to fix it, or you're going to use the right language, but it isn't one where you have to have it today and you have to know today how to get it done. But it's part of the journey. And I think it's starting small and just realizing that you learn together.
And to understand something that there's a local company, and obviously they can go to your organization as well, but it's up to the locally companies to approach you guys about
Definitely. And we have the Evansville Pride Partnership. I know many of you are members, your businesses are, and if you're not, please come speak with Mark or I afterwards, and please tell you a little bit more about that. But definitely we'll be able to find resources or connect you. If we don't know, we can connect you with somebody that could. Or if you have questions, we can definitely get those answered for you.
And I think there's a lot of things that companies can do it, so they can get a little bit overwhelmed, but like you're saying, like starting small, just adding information as they're going, or adding policies or procedures as they're going, and just having the learning process to make it less overwhelming and make it easier to just kind of start that process.
Absolutely. I wanted to come today with, when Mark and I were talking, just making sure to give a whole list of here's things to think through, but knowing you don't have to implement all this today. But starting to think through like, hey, maybe every year when we get ready for benefit season, we're looking at our policy. Let's just keep a mental note of, hey, let's just check making sure that we're ready to go that way. Or next time you're posting a job description, just looking at it and saying, oh, let's just give it an extra eye to this before we push it live for somewhere, and making sure that it's simple terms. One I'll use that I saw a smaller business use, they were looking for, they put a delivery man in their service, and it's like they're looking for a delivery person, and they caught themselves in it and called me and said, is this the right term? I also had an eyeglass, an optometrist call and say, hey, we're updating our form right now. Can you just take a look and say, like, are we framing the gender identity question right? We just want to make sure our customers feel included. And it's just, as you're going through, your daily actions at your business or your company, just putting that inclusion lens on things and just thinking through, taking a moment saying, oh, is this the right way to phrase this? And if not, we'll update it the next time, or we'll work on that then.
I think the great point that you had brought up was about starting small, like with one of those pictures in advertising and a company that got some feedback that might have been negative. I think keeping in mind as well is that's the vocal minority, right? Just as many people are probably thinking in their head, like, that's awesome, I love seeing that. And as advocates or allies, remembering that is just as important to tell those companies thank you as it is for people to complain about them, so they know, hey, I'm doing something right.
That's a really great point.
Well, and I think too with that, it's noticing that it's a broader space. So when you're looking at the people that are saying, hey, this is impacting my decision making, and it's not just the LGBT community, or an employer might think, I don't have any LGBT employees right now. Like, why am I going to start this process? But knowing that those things can impact not only if they do get somebody in, but also the company culture they have in general. That can affect the people that they have working for them, as well as their customers that would be coming in, and the way that they're viewed in the community as a whole.
Absolutely.
What was you had the your pronouns after, what was that link? That was why, because I love that. I've had people ask me about my pronouns being there, so I think that's awesome.
It is just a website called mypronouns.org.
Okay.
Mypronouns.org. It's a very simple, like 3 pages that says what are pronouns, what are examples, how do you use them, and why it matters. And
Yeah.
I'm seeing more and more companies just include that in it, just because if someone isn't familiar with it, say like, what is this? And to educate and allow that self-education for folks.
Is there any place or any form or anything that you have, I'm assuming we're probably gonna kind of get a copy of the presentation, that has some of those action steps so that individuals can just say, okay, yeah, you know, I added my thing onto Google, or I added this logo onto my business, or I joined my partnership, you know, like those types of easy wins
Sure.
to start them on that process.
Don't have one right now, but we'll work on creating one. I know Mark and I talked about having a handout for this, and I will be honest, I finished this about 9:30 last night. Because I was keeping an and I wasn't satisfied with it yet. I'm like, I need more. So absolutely.